Start recording. Okay, so I think we'll probably still have. Okay, Nate, I'll let you back in when you get back up, when you get your computer back up. I just completely lost my train of thought, and it hasn't even started, so it's bad news. I kind of want to just like go back over what we've read so far of Canterbury Tales. You're supposed to read through line 168, I think, or like after you were done with your quiz the other day, which I think everybody did well on their quiz. Well, I won't look at the grades right now because y'all can all see, but I think that I think everybody did really well. So that's good news, and probably helped some of your grades before we have progress reports today. I didn't grade the Chaucer web quest yet, just because I knew that not everybody turned it in, and I figured let's wait until progress reports are actually sent out, so it's one less zero you have to worry about. But hopefully everybody got that in. You can still get it in now, it'll just be late. And I think, actually, if you get it in by the end of today, I still won't count it late, because I know that we like found some kind of weirdness with it on Friday where like we couldn't turn it in, or you had to email it to me or something. You should be able to turn it in now, because I think somebody did. But if you get it in today, I still won't count it late. And then you wouldn't have to worry about a zero on your grade book. Okay, so I want to kind of go back over what we've read so far. Clearly, this is not like a really in-depth look into all the different characters that we're going to meet. Or actually, we're not even going to meet them, because all we're reading is the prologue. But it kind of introduces a bunch of different characters, just tells you a little bit of background. And then the rest of the Canterbury Tales after the prologue is like each of them gets their own little story. There's like the Knight's Tale, the Wife of Bath's tale, the Nun's tale. So they each have a little story. If you're interested in any of them, there's actually these like weird, excuse me, these like weird old cartoons. It's not COVID, I promise. All right, here comes Nate back.
Miss McCollum?
Oh boy, that is very quiet. Like I can hear you talking, but just barely. But what's up?
So we finally figured out what was wrong with Canvas.
Oh yeah.
The link that the school gave me, I cannot save to my browser and make a favorite, or it blocks it.
Okay.
It blocks my Google account. But Mr. Nelson was able to get me a new link to it, because that link was evidently broken. And
okay.
I was just wondering, because of that, may I have a little bit more time for that assignment?
Yes, you can. Now, if you haven't turned stuff in, there's still going to be a zero on your grade book in your Power School for it, but I'll change that when you turn it in.
Okay. When do the progress reports come out?
I wonder if I turn this up, will I be able to hear you any better? Probably not. But... Let's try again.
What?
I didn't hear the last thing you said, Eli.
When do progress reports come out this week?
They come out today. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's so quiet. Why is it so quiet? That makes me really like not want to continue sharing my screen. Okay. Well, we'll figure that out. In fact, once I get you guys started on stuff, it shouldn't be too big of an issue. I'm going to stop my AirPlay for right now so that hopefully I'll be able to hear you a little bit better. Okay, so who remembers any of the characters that we've met already? And I'll give you a hint. The different characters are the ones in italics when we're reading it. Who have we been introduced to so far? Anybody? There are at least 4 characters that we've met so far. It's all these people that are like, and also this person was traveling with us. Okay, so the first person we meet, it seems like people are not really remembering. We meet a knight first and learn a little bit about him. Essentially, the knight is like the perfect example of what a noble knight should be. They talk about how he wins every joust that he fights. He's won like 15, and like killed the other guy. Like jousting often resulted in death, and he mentions that I can't remember how they describe it. It's like kind of jarring because they're talking about how perfect and like noble he is, and then he's basically like, yeah, he speared them all to death. But the guy is like, the knight is very humble, which kind of shows a contrast to what people valued before. Like in Anglo-Saxon times, we know that they didn't really care that much about being humble. They cared more about like, if you had something to brag about, you should. The knight is not like that. He's very humble. So clearly, like some qualities that people value have changed. And also, we talked when we were doing our notes about how like courtly love and chivalry were a big deal back then, and the knight is a perfect example of that. He's also like one of the more noble people that we get introduced to. Most people that we're going to get introduced to are a little bit lower class, not necessarily super low class, but being a knight was a big deal. After we learn about the knight, it talks about his son, who is a squire. Which a squire? Anybody know what a squire is or what they do? I've heard of that, but not really sure what they do. Yeah. They kind of like, they help the knight. They sort of like run errands for them. They're like they're possibly in training to be a knight later, but it's all like young men, so they don't have a lot of like status at the moment, but they might later. And it mentions that the squire is like about 20, and he probably will be pretty like notable later on, because they're really bragging on this squire. They're like, oh, he's very good looking. I think I said something about how he attracts a lot of women. He is very accomplished. They say that he can like write poems and paint and ride and all these things that he can do. And then Sterling did mention the 4 that we've met so far. The other one, probably a word that we have never heard before, yeoman. It looks like yeoman, but it's pronounced yeoman. And that was like an attendant in a noble house. But he does a lot of other stuff too. They talk about how he like spends a lot of time outdoors. He is a forester. He is involved with archery. He has a hunting horn. He could stay outside, or like he spends a lot of time outside. And they even mentioned, it's kind of funny the way that they describe it. They said that his head looked like a nut because it's so brown. And that was kind of a symbol of like not, of like having to work outside or like spending a lot of time outside. And it was kind of looked upon differently than we look upon it now. Like people love to be tan nowadays. Like we consider that beautiful. But back then, and for a long time, if you were tan, it meant that you spent time outside, you worked outside, you possibly worked like a hard, like menial job, like farming or whatever. And if you were upper class or if you were nobility, then you got to stay inside and you got to be pale. So it was actually considered a lot more beautiful to have pale skin back then, because you didn't have to work. So this guy clearly, like, he spends a lot more time outside. He's not going to be like a noble. He does work in a noble's house, but he also spends a lot of time outside. They make a big deal out of his being dark. And then we meet the nun, who's like very prim and proper, and as you would expect a nun to be, and sentimental. She's very pleasant. Everybody likes her. She's also really educated, and we know that because it says that she speaks French. And we know that the clergy and the rulers were really the ones who spoke French. Common people spoke English. And then very briefly, it also mentions like people who don't really get their own story. They're like, oh, there was also another nun and 3 priests with this first nun. So I think we read somewhere that there would be 29 characters in all. Those would include the 3 priests and the other nun. So they're not all going to get their own stories, but it's all right. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, other than that review, so I guess the second thing we're going to do is read a little further in the Canterbury Tales. It's not super long. If you sit down and read the whole prologue like in one go, it might seem kind of long, but it's really not very long. We know it's like it's all in verse, so it rhymes, which can be like kind of frustrating to read just because it feels a little like Dr. Seuss, but it goes fast. So we will actually finish the Canterbury Tales like Wednesday or Thursday, I think, and then move on. We're not spending a whole long time on this. Okay, let me see if I've got this open. Oop. Yeah, we're gonna read to, we're starting on like line 169, and I'll share my screen with you, but if you want to get it open on your own, certainly you can do that. And we're gonna read through 318. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm also going to share it up here, or try to, in case you guys in here want to look at it here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to be picking up at the monk on line 169. Does anybody want to read a little piece of this? No, 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 no. You can't read.
You never heard that reference?
No.
SpongeBob reference when Miss Plankton's his cousin's home. He all get flushed down the toilet and one left. He's right there. He says, "I can't read."
No, I've never heard that. I can't believe I missed a SpongeBob reference all these years.
I can't stand. I don't. They kind of ruined SpongeBob. During my birthday weekend.
He's been around a long time.
watch a lot of TV, watch a lot of SpongeBob, get back to my roots.
Mhm.
And none of the shows were just so childish. It was better in the olden days.
It was better in the olden days, I
Seriously,
agree.
I remember it was supposed to be getting canceled like 6-7 years ago because they talked about SpongeBob getting canceled.
What?
I remember that. I was like,
Oh. Now that you say that, that is ringing a little bit of a bell.
It was like, it was before I moved to Charleston. It was like 9, I think.
Yeah.
Because I moved to Charleston when I was 11. And yeah, so it was around like 9, so I'm guessing around
A couple of years ago.
2012.
Weird. I have to look it up.
I remember, but never happened.
Hayward Christian's volunteering you. You don't have to if you don't want to.
I don't listen to him.
I was pretty sure. Although sometimes in one of my other classes, I have one student who just like volunteers everybody else and they like go along with it. Okay. I will read. I'll give you another option to read in a few minutes if you want to. I'm gonna probably stop for just a minute after each character. But we're starting at 169. It's on my screen. You can pull it up on yours if you prefer. Okay. A monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. A manly man to be an abbot able, which an abbot is just like another word for monk. Or maybe it's a type of monk. I don't know enough about monks to really tell you. Although, what does that say? The head of a monastery. Okay, like the main monk then. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle, when he rode, a man might hear, jingling in a whistling wind as clear, aye, and as loud as the chapel bell, where my lord monk was prior of the cell. These are actually really handy dandy on the side there to tell us some of the terms that we don't know. The rule of good Saint Bennet, or Saint More, I guess, because it's supposed to rhyme with ignore. As old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday and took the modern world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen, which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water, flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister, that was a text he held not worth an oyster. And I agreed and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin bade and till the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labor to himself. I don't necessarily understand like all of the references that they're making, but basically it sounds like this monk likes to spend time outside and he likes to, like, he's interested in sporting and hunting and things. And that's like not typical of a monk. And some people look on it as being kind of shameful. So he obviously, they're saying that like, you're kind of a fish out of water. It says that. If you're not just like in your cloister, like your circle of monks, you tend to kind of isolate with them. This monk was therefore a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence, oh look, there he is with his greyhounds, was all his fun. He spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the land, and on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking glass. So did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. Supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked a fat swan best and roasted whole. His palfrey was as brown as a berry. And I hate to stop right there because the rhyme is not finished, but the monk kind of seems like a fun guy. Like maybe he's not quite playing by all the normal rules of being a monk, but he like hangs out with animals a lot. He's like fat and funny. He's like a little bit fancier than most monks. Like it talks about he has fur on the ends of his sleeves and like this wrought gold pin that fastens his hood. And that's a little fancier than you would expect a monk, because monks even sometimes take a vow of poverty, so they definitely wouldn't have those things. But they do tend to be just sort of like modest people, because they're not going to place a lot of worth on worldly goods. But it seems like he does a little bit. And he likes to eat fat swans. How fun is that? I've never eaten a swan. So we're moving on to the friar, which you probably know what a friar is, because you might remember Friar Lawrence, and to a lesser degree Friar John from Romeo and Juliet. But a friar is a member of a religious group sworn to poverty and living on charitable donations. So kind of like a monk, but definitely like more reliant on charity. There was a friar, a wanton one and merry, a limiter, licensed to beg for donations. Okay, so he gets to busk on the sidewalks. A very festive fellow. In all four orders, there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Highly beloved and intimate was he with county folk within his boundary, and city dames of honor and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions. So even though he's poor, it sounds like everybody kind of likes him and relies on him, and he seems like sort of a fun guy. Both of these monks are sort of fun. Or so he said, with more than priestly scope. He had a special license from the Pope. Sweetly he heard his penitence at shrift, with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven, completely forgiven through the rite of confession. Shriving is a term that we don't really hear anymore, but they use it in England, and I only know this because one of my favorite comedians is English, and he talks about it. He has like a little bit about it, because apparently like the day before Ash Wednesday, which y'all might know what Ash Wednesday is because we still do, or like Catholics do that here, is Shrove Tuesday, and they like have pancakes. That's like their tradition. This is totally not related really to what we're reading. I just think it's interesting. But they go to confession and everything before Ash Wednesday and get absolved, and that's what shriving is. And Shrove Tuesday, that's like the past tense of shrive. Little cultural differences there, but also like how cool. I don't know how often that happens. I don't know how often Ash Wednesday is, but like to have Pancake Day, fun. Shriven, where did we go? And should he give enough, he knew in verity, truth, the penitent repented in sincerity. For many a fellow is so hard of heart, he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls and pocket knives to give to pretty girls. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs, he was champion of the hour. His neck was whiter than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent a man as he is not fitting with the dignity of his position, dealing with the scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of commerce with such slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. But anywhere profit might accrue, courteous was he and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went, for though a widow mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how do you do, He got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out, and how he romped, just like a puppy. He was ever prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days for a small fee in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar with threadbare habit hardly worth $1, but much more like a doctor or a pope. Of double worsted was the semi-cope upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him like a bell about its mold, when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness to make his English sweet upon his tongue. When he had played his harp, or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared. Friar Hubert, I suppose. So it sounds like he, even though he has taken a vow of poverty, he spends most of his time hanging out with rich people because they are more charitable. He's likely to get more out of them. And also it mentions, like, everybody likes him. It talks about how, like, a widow might not have anything to give him, but he's so polite and friendly that she still manages to give him stuff. So it does kind of seem like maybe he's a little bit materialistic to be a friar, but I mean, they're giving him money and that's how he's supposed to make his living. So moving on, there was a merchant with a forking beard and motley dress. High upon his horse he sat, upon his head a Flemish beaver hat, and on his feet daintily buckled boots. He told of his opinions and pursuits in solemn tones. He harped on his increase of capital and got more money. There should be a sea police, he thought, upon the Harwich Holland ranges. He was an expert in dabbling in exchanges. This estimable merchant so had set his wits to work, none knew he was in debt. He was so stately in administration, in loans and bargains and negotiation. He was an excellent fellow all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name. All right. So we've got this merchant in debt, but trying to kind of not let people know that he's in debt. An Oxford cleric, which is a student preparing for the priesthood. An Oxford cleric, still a student though, one who had taken logic long ago, was there. His horse was thinner than a rake, and he was not too fat, I undertake, but he had a hollow look, a sober stare. The thread upon his overcoat was bare. He had found no preferment, advancement, in the church, and he was too unworldly to make search for secular employment. So he hasn't found a job yet, but he is not interested in any job other than the priesthood. By his bed, he preferred having 20 books in red and black of Aristotle's philosophy than costly clothes, fiddle, or psaltery. Through a philosopher, as I have told, he had not found the stone for making gold. Whatever money from his friends he took, he spent on learning another book and prayed for them most earnestly, returning thanks to them, thus for paying for his learning. So he's like kind of relying on his friends to pay for his school. His only care was study, and indeed he never spoke a word more than was need. Formal at that, respectful in the extreme, short to the point, and lofty in his theme. A tone of moral virtue filled his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Probably about halfway through the Canterbury Tales. So today we met a few more people, and you can kind of see, like I mentioned, the point of him doing this, the point of him writing all these many, many different characters was to kind of show all aspects of society and like people from every point on the social spectrum. We start with the knight, who's the most, like, the highest up in the social order of things. We have a few members of clergy who are very well respected, but obviously the friar is going to be a little bit lower on the social spectrum than the nun or the other monk. And then we have people from kind of all between them and below them, and we haven't met anyone above the knight yet, but everybody is traveling together, which normally would not happen. not all of these people would interact with each other on a normal basis, but because they're all making their pilgrimage to what's the dude's name? St. Thomas of Becket, his shrine. That kind of like breaks down some of the social barriers, and they're all just like traveling together, sharing their stories. And each of these characters kind of represents like a stereotype. I mean, you have the knight who's like basically perfect. He's really accomplished. He's done a lot in his life. You have the nun who's very much like the picture of what a nun should be. She's very prim and proper and religious and pious and sentimental and pleasant, all these things that you would hope a nun would be. With the other ones, like these last two, the cleric and the merchant, it definitely talks more about money than in some of the previous ones. But the point is that they're all supposed to kind of be stereotypes of different people that would have been common in the Middle Ages. So to that end, I'm going to give you your next assignment and let you go ahead and get started on it. Although this class has been fast today. It's already 9:46. Whoop, not that. Okay, I'm going to publish this and we'll take a little look at it together. Boy, that seems small. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate this background information, the general prologue introduces readers to a variety of characters, each of whom represent a different aspect of medieval life. Through direct and indirect characterization, Chaucer reveals the virtues and faults of each, providing a brilliant social commentary. And when we say direct and indirect characterization, the direct characterization would obviously be like he's a student, he's not too fat, he had a hollow look. Like these are directly stating things about him. Indirect characterization would be like the fact that it talks about how he's got all of these books of Aristotle's philosophy, even though it doesn't directly say like he's a philosophical thinker. We can put that together through the things that they're telling about us. I'm sure you guys know what direct and indirect characterization are, but always helps to have a little refresher. So readers, because of that, are given insight into his society, its values, and its customs. By learning how Chaucer views each character, one is able to conclude how he viewed English society. Chaucer's characters are types. They're given no names for the most part. We did hear that the friar's name was Hubert, and I think there was one other one they mentioned his name. But they're meant to symbolize all people of their given profession, and put together, the characters outlined in the general prologue create kind of a microcosm of medieval English society. We can really get a reflection of what it was like as a whole. So this is what you guys are going to do. You're being asked to think critically about your own culture and society. And this is something that the cultural hero assignment will definitely help you with, that because you've already been thinking about what characteristics we value nowadays. And if you did it correctly, you've already come up with a character who reflects those values. So you might be able to kind of use that to sort of segue into this assignment. Think about what are some character types you observe on a daily basis. To put it another way, if Chaucer was writing the Canterbury Tales now, what is one character type he'd be sure to include? What do you think are like the main character types? And people have gotten really, like in the past when I've done this, people have gotten really specific in some ways, and then other people not so specific. So there have been character types like the millennial, and then on the flip side, the Gen Z. Somebody has done like the type of a gamer. Somebody did like an artsy musician. Just think about like what are common types of people that we see in culture nowadays. So you're going to choose one kind of character type and write 20 lines of rhyming couplets describing him or her. And rhyming couplets, that's exactly the way that Canterbury Tales are written. Rhyming couplets, just each 2 lines rhyme with each other. Though, ago, rake, undertake, stare, bear. And you're doing 10 lines, or 10 rhymes, 20 lines. So consider what this character type looks like, as well as his or her positive and negative personality traits. Just as Chaucer was known for his use of indirect characterization, you need to utilize both direct and indirect characterization in your character sketch. So, tell me directly some stuff about him, and then through the way you describe him, let me figure out some other things. So this is due, sorry, I'm looking at my calendar. This is due Friday, and we should have some time in class to work on it. I mean, you have like 7 or 8 minutes to start on it now. We'll have time tomorrow to work on it. And you may have time. Tomorrow might be the only day, but that's okay. Ugh. The only day that we have in class to work on it. So any questions about any of that? No questions? Okay, if you come across any questions as you're working on it, when is it due? Friday. It's due Friday. Friday at like 11:59. And like I mentioned, tomorrow will be the only time that we actually have class time to work on it. But that'll be fine. I don't think once you start writing, it shouldn't actually take you all that long to do this. But again, email me if you're struggling with it, or if you need help rhyming or anything like that. Any other questions? None here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the call then. You have like 7 minutes left of class, but you can go ahead and get started on that. Start thinking about your character type that you want to do.
It's not published.
What's up?
It's not published.
It's not published. I just published it. Modern day pilgrim activity. Oh, you know what? The actual module is not published. And now I've got to unpublish all the other stuff for the week. How dumb is that? Unpublish, unpublish. Okay, it should be good to go now. Is it published now? Should be. Okay. If there's nothing else, I will see you guys tomorrow.